Hello. Today you have the treat of having 2 teachers for the price of 1. I'm Mrs. Armentrout, this is Mrs. Lesh, and we are going to be talking about the lesson solving inequalities using multiplication or division. You can see an example of a problem here. 8y is less than or equal to 42 is an example of a multiplication inequality because the 8y indicates 8 times y. There are 3 steps that you need to jot down in your notes or your toolbox, so make sure you're prepared with those materials, and then let's get started. Step 1 is isolate the variable. And isolate means to be alone, so we want to get the variable alone. And remember that when we did this with equations, if you are multiplying, you do the opposite and divide by the same number. If you have a fraction, to get the fraction away, you would multiply by the reciprocal. Step 2. Red alert! Red alert! All right, step 2, we do not have when we are solving equations. There's a step called the inequality property with multiplying and dividing. And it states, when you multiply or divide by a negative number, reverse the inequality symbol. Here's an example that explains why. So if we have 5 is less than 8, and we multiply both sides by a negative 2, watch what happens. Negative 2 times 5 gives you a negative 10. 8 times a negative 2 gives you a negative 16. So our inequality reads negative 10 is less than negative 16, and that is false. So we reverse the inequality sign so that it reads negative 10 is greater than negative 16, because that is a true statement. Thinking of temperatures, negative 10 degrees is greater than or warmer than negative 16. Make sure you note and box in this only applies to multiplying and dividing. Notice we did do our silly hats with the red alert when we were working on adding and subtracting. Maybe we should use our hats when it comes up. Your last step is to write the solution set with the variable first. So make sure when you have your solved set, your solution, that the variable goes first, then your inequality symbol, and then your number. Here's our first example. 8 times y is less than or equal to 42. Remember, we want to isolate our variable and have our variable by itself. Our rule when we are multiplying a number with our variable is to divide by the same number. So I will divide by negative 8. And on the opposite side, I will also divide by 8. 8 divided by 8 is 1. Y is therefore remaining. And 42 divided by 8, oh, I'm thinking to myself, 8 times 5 is 40. I am going to have a remainder. So I'm thinking to myself, 42 divided by 8. 8 times 5 is 40, and I do have 2 left over. So that's 2/8, or I can simplify to 1/4. So 5 and 1/4. We're going to graph the set of solutions. So down below in the center of my graph, I'm going to write 5 and 1/4. I need to choose an interval to count by. I could count by 1s, 6 and 1/4, 7 and 1/4. I could count by 4s, 4 and 1/4, or 5 and 1/4, 5 and 1/2, 5 and 3/4. So I am going to count by 4ths. So 5 and 1/2, 5 and 3/4. In the opposite direction, I'll take a 4th away. I will have 5, and then 4 and 3/4. Above 5 and 1/4, I will draw a circle. Because it could be equal to 5 and 1/4, 5 and 1/4 is equal to 5 and 1/4, I'm going to color it in to show that's a solution that works in the set. And then all of the numbers less, notice the arrow's pointing to the left. Draw my arrow to the left. Checking to make sure that my solution set works, I'm going to choose a number that's underneath my arrow. I'm going to choose 5. So 8, instead of y, I'll use 5, times 5 is less than or equal to 42, and 40 is less than 42, which makes it true.
Taking a look at our second problem that you should be copying down, we have negative 6n, which means negative 6 times n, is less than 12. So in isolating your variable, we want to get n by itself, we have to do the opposite operation. So opposite of multiply by a negative 6 is divide by a negative 6. If I divide one side by a negative 6, I have to do the same to the other side. Negative 6 divided by negative 6 is 1, so 1n is remaining. Bring down my inequality sign. 12 divided by a negative 6 is negative 2. Now,
Red alert! Red alert!
we have divided by a negative number. And our property of inequality, when you multiply or divide, is we have to reverse the sign, the inequality sign. This has to be reversed. So, n is greater than negative 2 is going to be my solution set. Now, in graphing this, I'm going to plot negative 2 in the center, and then I'm going to put a couple numbers to the right and to the left. Remember, I'm dealing with negatives, so as I get closer to 0, my numbers get larger. My interval is going to be 1. When I go this way, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. So, I'm going to put a circle above the negative 2, and I'm going to check my inequality. There is no equal sign underneath there, so it stays open. Now, this states that n is greater than negative 2, so I'm going this direction because I want to indicate that my numbers are greater than. Now, let's check to make sure I've done this okay. So I have a negative 6. I can pick any number that's underneath the arrow. I'm going to choose negative 1. And I'm going to replace the n with a negative 1 to see if that is going to be less than 12. Negative 6 times negative 1 is going to be a positive 6 because same sign's positive. And 6 is indeed less than 12. So I have a true statement.
Our next practice problem has negative 20 is less than 1/4 times t. Remember, I want to isolate my variable. In this situation, I'm multiplying by a fraction. So our rule when multiplying by fractions is to multiply by the reciprocal. The reciprocal of 1/4 is going to be 4 over 1. On my opposite side, I will also multiply by 4 over 1. You have to squeeze it in here. Notice on this side that my 4's will cancel. I'm only left with 1. Therefore, t is remaining by itself. It's now isolated. On this side, because I have a whole number, I can simplify this instead of 4 over 1, 4 divided by 1, which is just 4. So now I have 4 times negative 20. So 4 times 2 is 8. Add on my 0 for 80. The signs are different. 4 is positive. 20 is negative, so my answer is negative. Now remember, there's no red alert. I was not multiplying by a negative number this time. No silly hats. I do want to reverse my inequality symbol, so I have my variable first. So I'm going to write t. Notice the t has the greater than symbol, so I'm going to write it the same way, and then my negative 80. In my graph, negative 80 is going to go in the center. I'm going to count by an interval of 1, so negative 79, negative 78 to the right, and as it gets smaller, negative 81. 1, and negative 82. I'm going to draw my circle in the center. It cannot be equal to, has to only be greater than negative 80, so the circle will be left empty. It's all the numbers greater. Notice it's pointing to the right. The right we go. I am going to pick a number to use over here for my check. I have a couple choices. I do notice that 4 would work better dividing if I choose an even number. Now I can pick any number the arrow is going to cross over as I go down. So notice it's going to be going to negative 60, negative 50, negative 40. So I'm going to choose a number that's easy to divide by 4, like negative 40. So I'm going to have 1/4 times negative 40, and I'll use that as my check number. So I know that 40 divided by 4 is 10. The signs are not the same, so it will be negative. And when I read my statement, negative 20 is less than negative 10. That's true, because if these were temperatures, that would be really cold.
In our last example problem, we have D divided by a negative 2 is less than or equal to a negative 7 2/10. So, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this divided by negative 2. Now, remember that since this is a fraction, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal to get rid of that. So, negative 2 over 1 times D will cancel that out. On this side, again, I'm multiplying by a negative 2, or 2 over 1, and that's going to even out my inequality. This cancels out, so I'm just left with D less than or equal to, and then I am multiplying negative 7 2/10 times a negative 2. Red alert! Okay, so I know that I'm going to have to pay attention to this when I am done multiplying. So, since we can use our calculators, negative 7.2 times negative 2, you can work that out. I don't have a calculator on me, so I'm just going to multiply. And I'm going to get 1 decimal here. Since both are negative, same signs, I get a positive result. So 14 4/10. Now, silly hat. Silly hat means I'm multiplied by a negative integer, so I need to reverse it. Instead of less than or equal to, I flip the sign, I reverse the sign, and so my solution is D is greater than or equal to 14 4/10. In graphing that, I'm going to go into the middle, put 14 4/10. I like my intervals to be nice and easy, like my hair color. So I'm going to go to the right to make it greater, 15 4/10, 16 4/10, and then to make them smaller, I go down by 1 whole, 13 4/10, 12 4/10. Again, you can choose any interval you'd like. You could count up by tens. You could have 24 4/10, 34 4/10. You could deal with the tenths and make it 14.6, 14.8. So you have that choice. Now I'm going to circle above my 14.4. Notice I have that equal. So I can include, I have to include 14 4/10 because that could be a true solution to my set. Notice the way that my sign is going. D is greater than, so I'm going to go in this direction. And then for my check, I'm going to take a look at any number under here. Remember, I can pick any number even if I don't see it. I could pick a whole number. I could pick 20. That would be nice and easy. So let's do that. For D, I'm going to plug in 20 because I know that on this number line I could see 20. Divided by negative 2 would be less than or equal to a negative 7.2. Remember that when you're picking a number and putting it in, go back to your original equation. Don't use the inequality symbol that you ended with when you were solving because of the red alert. Remember, we had changed it. So 20 divided by negative 2 is negative 10. And you can see that negative 10 is indeed less than or equal to negative 7.2. Make sure you have all of your problems in your notes so that you can refer to them as examples.